Welcome. We are at California State University Northridge as part of the Institute for Arts and Media, and we have an interview. My name is José Luis Benavides. I'm a professor of journalism at Cal State Northridge, and we have Charles Bowden, author and writer and journalist and all kinds of things that he'd been working on Juarez, and he's been writing about Juarez for a good number of years now. The focus of what we want to talk to him is really about, and that's what I want to talk to you, is about your experience in Juarez. So if you can give me an idea, when did you get interested in reporting about Juarez, and why, and what was the first result of your experience there?
Oh yeah, that's an easy question.
Mm-hmm.
I was sitting in a chair in Tucson, Arizona in June 1995, reading La Jornada, a newspaper from Mexico City, left of center. And it had a short story on page 30 or something of a boy being sentenced for the murder of a man in El Paso, and the man murdered was the brother of the head of DEA intelligence, Bruno Jordan, was the man murdered. And I was so frustrated then. For years I'd worked as a reporter. I'd been covering murders or seeing murders along the border, and there were all these little things, like little tombstone stories. Nobody connected the dots. Everybody pretended it wasn't going on. I thought, my God, we're killing people like it was Vietnam here, and nobody's doing anything. So I picked up a phone impulsively, you know, and I called information and got DEA intelligence in El Paso. And to my surprise, I went right through to Phil Jordan. Later I realized you can't screen calls to narcs because they got secret informants.
Mm-hmm.
And Phil Jordan comes on the line and said, look, I want to talk to you about the murder of your brother. And he said, I don't talk on phones. If you come here, I'll talk to you. And hung up. And I got in my truck and drove straight to El Paso. And that cost me 8 years of my life, basically. 7.5 years. That was June of 1995. In 2002, I brought out a book called Down by the River about that murder, a book I'd promised the publisher I'd do in 18 months. You know, even if you don't use drugs, you can be a poor judge of time. And the book bankrupted me, and that's how I got involved. Ever since then, I've been figuring out ways to leave Juarez. I told my friend Julián Cardona, I'm never going to do this again. I want to go back to nature. Then he and I did a book on the Mexican migration called Exodus. Then I did another book on an undercover narc. Then I did a book called Murder City on the slaughter in Juarez. Then I sort of worked with Molly Malloy. It's really her book on the autobiography of Sicario. And the reason I can't get out of there is because something's going on there that's far more important than I am, that I don't understand. So, you know, I guess to use a metaphor of American literature, Juarez has become my white whale, and I'm trapped with it. I don't know how you turn your back once you know what's going on there. A huge city of over 1 million that was the literal model for free trade in American factories has created mass poverty and death. I can't ignore it. Well, that's the answer.
Among the books that you mentioned, you didn't mention Juarez, the Laboratory of Our Future. And I know that was, I mean, after this first time that you go to Juarez to explore about that that killing, and then that leads you to Down by the River. How did you meet this this group of photographers, and how you come up with that idea of doing a book on
No, that's
Juarez?
a fair question. You know, I mean, I guess I'm getting senile. I thought it would happen later in the day, but it's happening in the morning now. I get there in June of '95. By July, I hear this talk that I'm certain is true, that the boy who killed Bruno Jordan is charged with it and been convicted. His brother was murdered for knowing too much. And there's supposed to be a photograph of his body that had been tortured. So I go into Juarez and find these photographers, street photographers, guys who work for the paper, and I'm stunned by their work. Incidentally, I never got the photo. It probably didn't exist, you know. And I look at their work, and I think, this work is far better than in the U.S. Arthur Fellig was a famous American photographer called Ouija, who shot street crime in New York in the 30s and 40s. And I thought, my God, Arthur Fellick's still alive. He lives in Juarez now, and he speaks Spanish. And so I write a story about these guys using what was then happening, an epidemic of murder of women and the poverty of the city. And Harper's publishes it, and it's called While You Were Sleeping. And suddenly the world is interested in these guys. Aperture, the premier photo publisher in the United States, maybe the world, calls me and wants to do a book with them, you know, and so then I can't get out of it. Now the book is the idea of a man named Julián Cardona, my friend. Julián had organized all the photographers before I ever got there. He held a show called Nada que Ver, Nothing to See, that no one in Juarez or El Paso would display, exhibit. They had to rent rooms, the photographers, to hang these photos. That is the guts of the book. So basically, I'm window dressing to get the book published in New York. The book then won the International Photo Book of the Year award, and it, frankly, has become renowned. You know, and I call it the laboratory of the future, because I thought what I was seeing there, American-generated poverty in factories owned by American companies that pay slave wages. And I want to be clear, when I say slave wages, wages no human being can live on. It's not a living wage, you can't survive. And then I saw the bloom of the drug industry there, and the billions sloshing around. By the summer of 1995, the Juarez cartel, according to DEA intelligence, was grossing $250 million a week. And this is big money. And so I call it the laboratory of our future. That unless we do something, treat people decently, end this insane drug war, pay decent wages, this is going to grow and this is going to blow up in our face. And I still believe that. It may be the one time in my life I'm sure I was right.
What is very interesting about the collaboration, and I know you've done a good number of these ones with photographers, with graphic artists, with people that are visual artists, and you appreciate and know about their craft as well as your own craft, right, and respect that. But what is interesting about your collaboration with the journalist in Juarez is that, with the photojournalist in Juarez, is the first time that you are collaborating with people that are not in the U.S. Tell me a little bit about how difficult and how similar or different was from your previous collaborations with other visual artists.
The cultural divide. The Mexicans didn't trust me. They thought I was going to take their negatives, and I took 3,000, essentially, with Aperture to New York, and sell them out and steal them. So it took 6 months to convince them that that couldn't happen. I'd go, you know, they would own me. There's laws here. Then I go to New York. I've got 3,000 images. 50% of them or 60% are of murders. I'm dealing with some guys that are 30 years old that have photographed personally 500 murders. And New York cuts down the number of murders, which I agree with this belief that this will deaden the viewer. So here's the odd thing. The book was attacked by what they now call progressive people, the left, for commodifying death. Apparently some people like words so ugly you turn your face away, you know, because it had dead people in it. But we only 20% of the book is murders. The same time the book comes out, two things happen. One, the photographers attack me for whitewashing their city. There's only 20% of the photos are dead people. Don't you know what's going on here? And then one of the guys in there, Jaime Murrieta, he's a real, street guy. I loved him. He's buying the books because he can get them at a discount and driving around in his car all night in Juarez, selling them to cops who are paying a fortune because they want, oh, I killed that guy. On this page, they want their own copy of the book. So it's crazy.
They want their own vanity.
They want, yes, they want. The police loved it. It was like a memoir of their work. All these dead people, because a lot of the killing then is now was done by the government. Now, and then the book, it had an afterlife. The mayor of Juarez crossed the river and denounced me when the article came out in Harper's on El Paso television as a disgusting person. But when the book came out, it was too late. There had been too much violence. It was accepted. And then it's gone on to have a life of its own. That a lot of people, photographers in Europe and other places, have gone to Juarez because they saw these photographers, this book. And I think what attracted them was what struck me. These people were doing real work. You know, this was not arts photography. Some of it's beautiful in a horrible way, but they were slapping you in the face with life using a camera. And frankly, I think it's far more powerful than film. Now, since then, my collaboration with them was, I made sure Aperture went to Juarez, because I said, you can't deal with these people, meaning Mexicans who don't have a lot of money if you're a stranger. You got to go down there and establish a relationship, which Melissa Harris, the editor of Aperture, did. And secondly, I said we have to have some collaboration. We showed them the blue lines, as you call it, you know, so that they feel a part of it. The worst part of it was when it won the book award. The International Center for Photography gave the award to me, had me pick it up because they wouldn't pay for 13 photographers to go to New York. And so a guy who doesn't own a camera, has the visual ability, I guess, of slime mold or something, has to get up and accept the award. Well, it wasn't right. You know, they should have done it, but I couldn't fix that. So anyway, I feel good about it. So, since then, all my collaborations have been with individuals. Julián Cardona, for example, and Alice Briggs.
There was a good number of photographers this time, 13.
13, yeah. We put a lot. We wanted a lot of photographers. That was my insistence, for protection. I thought if I have 13 photographers, there's less chance of them being attacked, threatened in Juarez, because the photographs in the book had never been published. The newspapers had refused to publish them.
Why they didn't publish it?
Well, because the newspapers were committed to not portraying what was going on in the city, the eruption of violence. You have to,
so the idea behind this is that they were defending the government for not...
Yes, the newspaper was presenting a city that the government and the equivalent in the U.S., the Chamber of Commerce, approved of. I mean, there's photographs in there of kids in school. And the school is there on a dirt slab surrounded by wooden pallets with no roof. And it's 107 degrees, and they're sitting at little desks going to school. There's no shade. Well, the city of Juarez and the Mexican government didn't want that known. And to its discredit, the U.S. press had never conveyed that. I believe it was at around the time of the millennium here that I finally saw in an American paper the actual wages in the maquila. American newspapers had made a career out of reporting wages as benefits. Like, say, for example, you actually earn $40 an hour in benefits or something, you know, your retirement, health, and everything. They were putting that as the wages, when they would never do that for an American worker. No reporter writing that story would give his wages, including his retirement plan. It was a deliberate fraud, and I'll tell you why. Because the wages were starvation wages. At that time, they were $40 a week or so. In a city where the cost of living was 90% the same as El Paso. It wasn't cheap to live there. So yes, that's why there was a censorship, why the photographs had never been published, hardly any of them, and why when it came out, it had a kind of explosive effect, I believe.
The book has a message that I think is still survives time, right? I think today you can still go back and look at that book and say, well, it has all the elements of what you've been writing about Juarez for the last 15, 20 years. Is it that you guys arrived together to these ideas, or that you came from different perspectives, right? The photographers that were working in Mexico, that were mostly associated with newspapers, right? With El Diario and with other newspapers there. But they seem to have a very critical framework of what was going on in Juarez. And you do have a critical framework as well of the role of the U.S. and what was going on. So tell me how that happened.
They all knew something was going on. They'd lived in the city, not just the violence, the explosion of poverty, the colonias, they weren't even mapped. They didn't have theories, a lot of them. I mean, these were people of very little money and of limited education. Like my friend Julián Cardona, as smart as a whip, he's self-educated. He has a ninth grade education and reads Noam Chomsky, something I can't bear to do. You know, like bench presses, books. But At the time, when I showed up there, they said something I've never forgotten. I meet them in Juarez. I'm trying to get the single photograph of a homicide. I stumble into this world. And they said, we've been expecting you. We've been waiting for someone to notice. And of course they were right. Because what I thought is, my initial reaction is, why in the hell hadn't I been told about this? I don't just mean the photographs. What I was seeing. And so they were right. I was moved by that. That they had put on this show everybody ignored. But to their credit, they knew they had captured something essential. And what they'd captured, I'll make clear, they had captured the failure of an economic policy I'd believed in. I'm a guy who was in favor of the North American Free Trade Treaty. I was in favor of destroying the Mexican economy as it existed, state corporatism, because I thought it would destroy the pre-party and free people, and it made things worse. NAFTA was a disaster, and when I get there in '95, a year or so after NAFTA, I can see it happening. And it was like a wake-up call. These factories were not freeing people, they were creating slaves. Poverty was spreading, not decreasing. The city was filling with rural people from southern Mexico who'd been destroyed by free trade because when NAFTA kicked in, corn cost $200 a ton to raise in Mexico, and you could buy it in the U.S. for $100 a ton. That destroyed every damn ejido in the country in less time than it takes to drink a cup of coffee. And so yes, we've been wondering when someone would notice. Well, look, I'm not a rocket scientist. Even somebody as dull-witted as me realized what I was seeing. And so yeah, those photographers, I think everybody owes a lot to. That they did what the government didn't do. The entire U.S. press failed, in my opinion. They still fail. That Julián Cardona, my friend, is the only person I know that's secretly taken photographs inside a maquila. What it really feels like, because that's contraband. It's easier to smuggle drugs in the U.S. than get a camera inside a maquiladora.
Damn, I forgot what I was going to ask you.
Oh, it's my sign?
No. I was thinking the photography, the selection of photographies was made by them, I'm assuming?
Both. It was mutual. That they would have had more killing. But it was mutual. That there's some shots I forced in. Because you have to have a rhythm in a photo book. There's a couple scenes in there of people eating food.
Yeah.
That's why. That's me. Like, this is actually a human community. This is not a rogues gallery here. At that time, 1.5 million people were getting out of bed every morning and going to work. But something's terribly wrong here with the poverty and the murder and that. But they consented, meaning Aperture really worked with them. Like I said, they saw the mock-up before it was finally settled. Now, my lack of contribution, it ends with an essay by Eduardo Galeano, who I think is the most neglected Latin American writer.
Journalist as well.
That's right, but he takes magical realism to a place where you don't get clouds of flowers as a storm, you get real stuff. His history of Latin American open vein is a masterpiece, and so is his Memories of the Fire. He wrote an essay, We Can't Be Like You Because of Limited Resources. I went to Aperture and said, I want that. And of course, they have the connection. Melissa Harris knows everybody on Earth, apparently. She just picked up a phone. Apparently, she knew Galeano. And then they put an essay in there that I think is terrific by Noam Chomsky on free trade. It's real short. At that point, I tried to get out of the book because I told her, this is preposterous. I'm a pygmy, and you got 2 giant redwoods. I mean, the hell needs me? These guys say it all. So I think I was left in the book to keep the photos from banging into each other because I'm not necessary between Chomsky and Galeano. They're both brilliant and clear writers.
And I can feel the same, exactly what you're saying. I see your absence really in that book. I mean, you are there. Evidently, you're writing the text of the book, but your presence is not really as strong as it could be, for example, in the case of Exodus with Julián. Is a real.
No, you're right.
It's a completely different book. So you did that on purpose. So you allowed it was to allow the photographers to.
I think it's a sin. Probably you should be executed on the curbside for explaining photos. You provide a floor, a context, as it were, for a photo, but the photos speak for themselves. You know, you just sort of suggest the world these are coming from, and then you look at the photos. You don't get in their way. But I did a book with Julián in Exodus. It has one continuous caption.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a great book on the Mexican Revolution called The Wind That Swept Mexico,
Mm-hmm.
which is essentially a long run-on sentence. And I thought, that's the way to do it. I'll be like a piano player underneath the photos. And then in the back, Julián has very detailed captions. You know, if you really want to know everything about the photo.
Well, those are fantastic captions. I mean, I've read them all.
I did it. I sat there and he's throwing down photos. It was like improv. You know, I'm sitting in Molly Malloy's house in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Julián's throwing down photos. I got a laptop and I'm playing along with them. Like a one take, you know, because that's the effect I wanted. Because the book, he had spent 7 or 8 years on the book. We were having drinks once, and I said, look, I think the most significant thing going on in North America is the migration of the Mexican people.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's quite possibly the largest human movement occurring on Earth. I know both governments are lying about it, its magnitude. It's going to move at least 10% of the Mexican people here. They're never going back. They're not coming to pick apples. This is too big. And there has to be a record of it. You know, and my God, he spent 6 or 8 years out there. And it had to be by a Mexican. Because if you see American photographs of the migration are, here comes the enemy, you know.
Mm-hmm.
They're like shot by cops. When in fact, when you're out there with them, and I've done this, I've crossed illegally with Mexicans in the summer, you're with people that are terrified, they're being hunted, they're extremely stressed, that's why a lot of them die, because they're fugitives and they don't understand why, because they're almost all poor and all they want to do is work. It's not like, well, I'm a fugitive because I just robbed a bank. I have no future, I just want to come and work somewhere. In 1982 or 3, in June, I went to Sonora, to the Gran Desierto in northern Sonora, the Pinacate country, hooked up with 20, 30 Mexicans, walked 45 miles in a night across the waterless desert to try and capture what this felt like. At that point in my life, I ran marathons and things. I was a pretty healthy guy, and it damn near killed me. I got out to the interstate that goes to San Diego at 9:30 in the morning. I did it with a friend. I walked into a bar to cool down, a little town called Tacna. I laid on the floor. It was a Basque owner. He knew who I was. He came over and brought me liquids for 6 hours before I could urinate. That's how bad it was. I'd been in a furnace. What I never forgot is the guys I came north with, they were out there. They couldn't walk into that bar. They're hiding in a goddamn ditch waiting for the coyote. They'd been through the same hell I'd been through, only worse, because they were stressed. I couldn't get in trouble. If the Border Patrol found me, what were they going to do? Say, you can't be in your own country? They were hunted, you know, and they were going to go on and on. They're going to go to Los Angeles or Chicago. They're going to work and work and work. And I thought, good God, you know, you build countries with people like this. Nobody could kill these people, I mean. The nation, this is the building block of nations. Because, you know, I go back to the newsroom, surrounded by, what's the phrase in English? A bunch of candy asses, you know. I never forgot that night and what was going on. What was going on was a breakdown of Mexico. I mean, you can't have a healthy country if you export the people who can do the most for you. And frankly, the juniors, as they call them, the children of the rich, they're not going to do anything for you. They're like the punks you meet in the country club in the United States. The people I walked with, Christ, you could do anything with them. I mean, they're going to build whole worlds right out of their bodies. They're tough.
So where do you think that you get that kind of, is very unusual for a journalist, and especially journalists that work regularly in newsrooms and they do this for a living. They end up hanging out with people that have power in some form or another, right? Either cultural or money or whatever.
They suck up the power.
And they seem to be comfortable with that, and they adopt the vision of these people. Your vision really is about people that are the common folks, the fellas that are actually doing the job, and your writing is very human. I mean, it makes them very human, especially for readers that are not in that kind of situation.
To be fair, they actually are human.
Yeah.
It's not a big job to make them human. Look, I'll try and, I'm not drinking a joke. I think I am a product of something.
Mm-hmm.
Both my parents were extremely conservative. My father would be easily characterized as right-wing, but they both had risen from grinding poverty, and they drilled into my head and my brother's head and my sister's head that people need help, that you're never better than other people. My father got out of World War I, and the only job he could get for an entire winter was swinging a pickaxe digging a ditch. And I remember him telling me he'd be there swinging this pickaxe and see these trains go by with people in dining cars. And so yeah, I mean, you know, I didn't think I was writing about Mexicans. I thought I was writing about working people in a world that pretended they didn't exist. Both the Mexican world, they're being preyed on by Mexican police before they crossed. You know, I saw that the night I crossed. And then here, they were being hunted by the Border Patrol. You know, like there was some threat to the Republic. You know, like now we've made them into this preposterous national security thing. Well, they're not a threat to national security. I mean, even if you don't want to. I mean, somebody that come in here to get a job isn't going to blow up your house, for Christ's sake. Nonsense.
Correct.
So anyway, that's how I got into it. But let me go on. The other thing is, I have deep feelings about writing, because the only thing I know how to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can't play an instrument. I'm only allowed to sing in the shower. And I think writing is not simply conveying ideas. You know, I'm reasonably intelligent. You know, I can read without moving my lips. You have to convey feelings. If you write about something, the person has to feel it. The same way you feel with great music or great photographs. You feel a photograph before you can even explain what it's about. It's just, you're totally possessed by it. Well, that's what I want to do with words. You know, I want to get in. I used to tell people my dream is to invite you in for a cup of coffee, and put you in a nice chair, give you a cup of coffee, and then nail the door shut. And you can't leave. That you have to experience this thing.
Is that the reason you choose to, when you're writing, you choose to write? And I don't know, because I'm not coming from a literary tradition, right? I'm coming more for a joke. So forgive my question if it is too dumb. The idea, what I feel in your writing is that it's too raw. Like, you really know what the reader knows exactly how you're feeling. The reader knows everything that's happening with you. The reader knows, for example, in that book of Exodus, they know your own story, right? Your own story and the story of migration of your family somehow weaved into this, into the story of Mexicans migrating north. Is that the reason you choose that kind of voice to convey these feelings?
I don't know. You know, the voice chooses me. I'll be honest. I've been to these creative writing programs as a visitor, and it's like Mars to me. You know, you want to do first person, second person. Goddamn, that's like talking to a musician and saying, which piano key do you hit? The key picks you. You hit the one that does it. You know, it's like a music. I want it raw, in that I don't want things too polished, and by that I'm not talking about grammar. I want people to not be safe. Why ask your time if you leave the same way you were when I met you? I'm wasting your time and mine. I want to mess with your head, and I can't mess with your head unless I mess with your heart. You have to feel it. And I used to tell students before I gave up, you have to tell stories. You can't write about issues if you wait for the right story to convey it. Because if you read the Bible, something every reporter does because you're trapped in lonely motels on stories, and it's the only damn book there. Christ conveyed everything he wanted people to know with parables, with stories, because they wouldn't forget a story. You know, it would stick in their mind. If you want to talk about the need for political asylum, fine. People will nod. But if you tell them about a man from Chihuahua And the state police came to and demanded he pay them their monthly extortion fee, and he didn't have any money. They held him on the ground and cut his feet off. They'll never forget that. And they'll never forget he's in the United States asking for shelter, and our government saying, well, we don't know if we can do that. They'll remember that forever. So yeah, if that's raw, that's what I go for, so you don't forget it. But one of the most moving things I found when I was doing Exodus was I found these cosmetics in the desert. And so you have women at risk of being raped. They're going to walk 40, 50 miles through volcanic heat in this valley, the Altar Valley. And, you know, the weight will kill you. You can't carry enough water, to be honest. And they're carrying new lipstick, a new eyeshadow. And what I thought when I found these things, this is what's keeping them alive. This is the thing that's giving them a sense of self. This is their refusal to be animals or illegal aliens or whatever the hell people say. That this stuff isn't surplus. This is the only reason they're going to make it if they do. And so, you know, I would start collecting them. You'd find them in cast-off clothing. You know, they haunted me. You know, just haunted me. They still do. But last summer in August, I was walking down a dirt road near the border with binoculars, bird watching. There are several things I try to do to keep sane. None of them work, but bird watching is one of them. And suddenly I hear this noise, and I turn around, and this guy slides out of the brush, and he's got the water jug on a stick and another one tied to his belt. And he's filthy, and he's short, and he's brown, and he looks like hell. And I remember that I'm like this, and for a second I pretended not to see him. Like, oh, what the hell do I do now? And he's from Honduras, it turns out. He's been lost for 3 days, you know, hadn't had any food. But here's what struck me. He comes up to me, he's in really bad shape. He said, which way is Atlanta? And I said, look, it's a long ways. I took him, I was living out in the middle of the desert in isolation. I took him there, fed him, you know. He took 2 or 3 showers, you know, in a row, and gave him food, slept the night, and I smuggled him through the Border Patrol line. You know, and gave him some money, bought him a cell phone. That's what you really need. That's the weapon of choice if you're illegal. And sent him on his way. But what struck me is, which way is Atlanta? You know? But and I told him, I said, look, if I let you go on, you won't make it. Because I said, I walk here every day, and there's Border Patrol everywhere. They're hiding everywhere. It's out in the desert. But I said, you'll never get through. But I said, you spend the night, I know where they hide, I'll just take you through them. You know, which I did, you know, kicked him loose, you know. But which way is Atlanta? And I know Minutemen and people. I actually have drinks with Border Patrol people. They're not monsters or something, but they have this image of these people which is preposterous. Not so much the Border Patrol, but the Minutemen. You know, they see these people as security threats. Well, they're only security threats if you like bad food. I mean, Jesus Christ, thank God the people are coming from Mexico instead of Iowa.
Walk me a little bit about the process of doing Exodus, because I think, and I'm jumping from Juarez, the laboratory of our future, to Exodus, and I'm missing one book in the middle, but...
Well, that's all right. Coming to the damn things anyway. We'll kill all the trees.
I'll go back to it in a moment. But talk to me a little bit about how the idea, was it originally Julián's idea to do the book of photography, and then you went along on the right, or was that a common idea that you guys developed together?
I think we just sort of, it came up with us. I think the only contribution I made was say this is bigger than anyone's admitting. I mean, obviously, Julián's a Mexican citizen, born in Zacatecas, raised in Juarez. He sure as hell knew about illegal immigration. And his barrio, which was a rough one where he came up, of his little group, cohorts, he's the only one who stayed. All the others went north. They're all in the United States, Dallas, Phoenix, L.A. You know, so he knew about it. It was the magnitude. There's 2 things. We'd sit there and drink in my yard that I'd argue, and one is the magnitude. I just said, I know this village, which he'd never been to, and I said, this village is moving twice as many people as the U.S. government says is crossing the entire 2,000-mile border. And the second thing was I was convinced from talking to people this was an exodus. You know, this was a transplant of human beings, like the Great Migration in the 19th century in the U.S. You know, that, and part of it touched my heart. Like my mother was a third-generation American, I think some of the others was, you know. And I never knew my grandmother because she died, influenza, 1919. I knew my great-grandmother because she lived forever. And she was 96 and had never learned a word of English, spent all her life here. And my mother was working in a field in Iowa when she was 8. She was born here. And they came and dragged her to school. And she didn't know a word of English. All she'd ever spoken was German. And so I look at these Mexicans, you know, I think, well, Christ, they can't threaten the country. My own mother didn't ruin it. I mean, there was that strange to me. You know, the experience of rising through poverty, learning a language, you know, strange mores. My mother was raised in literally a German colony in Iowa. Everybody was German. I went back there when I was an adult for a family reunion. I stopped in this little place called Germantown, Iowa. I go into a bar, and if you go in a bar in midday in Iowa, the only guys in there have one arm. They've all been injured by corn picking machines because, you know, they're the old farmers that can't work anymore. And they start grilling me, you know, like, you know, what the hell are you doing? They ask about this, and they ask about this, and one of them leans forward and says, "You're Bertina's boy." I met these people in my life. It was like visiting a tribe. They had this history, you know, like Native Americans. You're Bertina's boy, you know, that was all right. I go to the burying ground, and there's only probably 2 family names. My mother's family and the family her people married into, this whole little thing. Well, look at it. This is like being in the Sierra Madre or someplace. There are a lot of pueblos all over Mexico. It was the same thing, you know, so. But it felt familiar. The structure of Exodus was we wanted black and white photos. There's only one color photo, and frankly, Julián didn't agree with me. I wanted it on the cover.
On the cover.
It's a dump site where people have to dump their clothing and everything, and it just, I thought it didn't work in black and white because it looked like flowers in color. And I wanted it fierce but lyrical because I wanted to write the migration story of a people, and I wanted to end it with Julián because there was a point when I was doing Down by the River. We went back. We went deep in the Sierra Madre and went back to Zacatecas where he was raised, you know, his effort to come back with his roots and his love affair with Mexico. Because Julián should have come north years ago, but he won't leave. He feels like it'd be treason. You know, he's bilingual, he's intelligent, the opportunities are far greater here. You know this better than I do. But he won't leave, you know. Like he told me once, what do you do if you fall in love with a woman and she's not a beautiful woman? You're still in love with her. That's why, when I asked him, why the hell do you stay here? I told him, I can't argue with this. You know, I can't convince somebody they're wrong when they say something like that to me. You know, that I understand. So then it just flowed that way. And then I intercut it with this account of the Aztec or Nahua culture by this priest, you know, at the time of the conquest. Because Julián turned me on to the book, insisted I read it, he was in love with it, and I fell in love with it. Because I wanted this primal feeling of the Mexican people. I mean, in my opinion, the Mexican people have been fleeing for a long time. I mean, the Aztecs were not King Arthur in the court, you know, they were exploitive conquerors. And so the move north is part of 500 years of pain, you know, trying to find a place in the sun. One of the things that drives me nuts about the conversations on illegal immigration is El Paso and Juarez. El Paso is 800,000 people, roughly. Juarez, 1.2 million now. They're both essentially Mexican cities. One's Mexican-American, one's Mexican, and the families are related. One city is one of the most violent cities in the world. El Paso, with the same people, genetically, same family names. has the lowest crime rate of any city of its size in the United States. You know, you can fall asleep there waiting for crime. And I believe there's a reason. In El Paso, your children get an education for free. You get paid wages. The water comes out of the faucet. The lights work. The cops are fairly honest, you know. I operate there. And, you know, and people, you know, you can have a house, feed your family. I believe that lowers the need to commit crimes. Both cities are saturated with drugs. That's not it. I mean, you know, I sometimes think half the occupancy in El Paso is stash houses, but there's no crime. Just none. That's because people have lives. And the other thing, I was talking to a friend of mine who's an evangelical minister in Juarez. The other thing I have is hope. One of the oddities of the illegal immigration here is you can spot neighborhoods of illegals because everybody's opening businesses. It's like, you know, there are no slackers. They're all little entrepreneurs. You can literally feel the building shaking with all these schemes they have in their head. Frankly, apparently the biggest idea of making money in Mexico is come to the U.S. and open a bridal shop. But they're everywhere. You can feel this vibrancy. And it's because people have hope. If they make a buck, they get to keep it. Nobody comes and says that. You see it in Dallas. There's 500,000 illegals in Dallas creating a separate city with no help.
Do you think that idea reflects what? Because I know Julián, I've talked to Julián, and Julián said that he wanted the book to be named The New Americans, right?
Yes.
And yet end up being with the title of Exodus. And it really is a matter of perception. If you're in the U.S., you can see this as an Exodus.
Yes. No, that's true.
But if you're in Mexico, you can see that people going over there as New Americans.
Well, I put that in the caption. Yeah, it really is perception, because to me, of course that's what they are. This is where Americans come from. And frankly, this is where Native Americans come from, too. You know, they crossed a land bridge. So, yes, these are the new Americans. See, for me, that's what Exodus, in a sense, meant. They're not going home. But, yes, it's
How long did it take you to, I mean, it took Julián several years to do all those photos, right?
Well, I told him at the beginning.
How long did it take you to write the book?
Well, I wrote it a couple months. I can't remember. You know, there was a period in my life where I did 6 books in 18 months. Not to be repeated, you know. This is not good for me. You need to walk by on the beach once in a while. And it was in there that what I told him at the beginning when he launched this, I said, you get the photos and I'll get it published here, which I did with the University of Texas. You know. I made it part of a trilogy I wrote called The History of the Future. You know, I did 2 other volumes with Michael Berman. But, and so that's how it worked out. Then we, you know, did the layout. Yeah, I let him pick the photos pretty much. You know, I don't like to mess with photographers. I'll tell them what I think. You know, that's their world. You know, so we had them all on the floor there. You know, that kind of thing. I'd comment, that's about it. And we did some things intuitively. We went to Phoenix for the march in 2005 or 6 when Mexicans here were marching, you know, to come out of the shadows. And I was stunned because I'm pretty good at counting. I stood in one fixed point, counted how many people were crossing in front of me, and the sequence, you know, how fast. And I quit after 200,000. And the papers essentially didn't cover it, never said how many. I am convinced what I saw that day, with my counting, was the largest gathering of human beings in the history of Arizona and the Southwest. There has never been an event I know of in the region that had 200,000 people. And there was silence. You know. Then Julián went on to L.A. and did that one. You know. And what was moving about these people is they were embarrassed. There were women and children, you know. They weren't embarrassed. But there were all these guys in their T-shirts who weren't at work that day. And you had this look on their face, you know, they knew they had to do this, but this is what women and children do. Men don't march down the streets, they go to work. Why am I here? You know, they were torn. And it was really moving, you know. One guy had written on his T-shirt with a felt tip pen, I think, it said, I just want to be your friend. The big burly guy. No, it's terribly moving, and it was ignored. I never saw any spectators. It was just the marchers. It was like there was this huge silence in the city. That didn't happen. And they marched from the state fairground to the state capitol, and it was just ignored. You know, I don't think I'll ever forget that. Or these faces, you call it unease in the men. You know, like this is childish. And of course, it wasn't. In the end, it boomeranged at first. You know, oh my God, there's so many of them. But I believe that coupled with this recent election, when the biggest weakness in the Hispanic community got cured, they actually went to the polls. In this country, if you don't vote, we can ignore you. So that turned it around. That's why the immigration bill's on the table. That's why the racism's declining, you know. It's why Mexican Americans and Central Americans and South Americans are seen as potential citizens, not a menace. I don't know what the hell is it with this country? They're afraid of everybody that knows how to cook. I mean, I'm sorry, but it's true. You know, you can go all over this country. Like, I'm German. No matter where you go, how big the city is, they only need one German restaurant. The food's terrible.
I know I missed Down by the River, but now Kent's making signs to me.
Yeah,
and I don't know how long I have. So let me jump to both Down by the River and Murder City, which I see more continuity about that work, right? That work of Down by the River is your really first long-term foray into what's going on in Juarez and drug trafficking.
And drugs. Yeah, it's simple. I did 3 books that are like a trilogy. Down by the River was, I wanted to do 2 things. I wanted to write the history of the drug war, which I considered a war against the American people and the Mexican people, using a single murder, the murder of Bruno Jordan in Texas, and I picked him because he was the brother of the head of DEA intelligence. Then in doing that, I went to Dallas and met the mistress of Amado Carrillo, who had been the head of the Juarez cartel. He was then dead. He was a big drug dealer. And I'm interviewing her, and suddenly her handler, this cop, shows up. It's like most male encounters like that, a little head-butting, you know. Well, hell, naturally, we became friends, you know. And he'd been undercover for 22 years as a narc. And we became close because we'd both lived in a world of evil. And we needed to detox. So I wrote a book about him called The Shadow in the City, and that's what it's about, evil. He was convinced he was evil by being a narc for 22 years. His name's Kim Sanders. Then after that, I thought, enough of this. I've been putting off this book I wanted to write for years about the desert, one I must say I've never written. And the violence explodes in Juarez, starting around the first of the year 2008. It just rolls on until 11,000 people are dead in the city I knew. And so I wrote Murder City, you know, and Julián did the photos. Molly Malloy did this appendices, where she took the first 4 months and listed all the murders. And no one will ever read even that many, but you look at it and you realize, my God, you know, the numbers can't convey it. And then after that, I got involved with this killer, Sicario for the Juarez cartel. I did a magazine story. Molly and I and my friend Gianfranco Rossi did a documentary film where the guy talked. And then Molly did his autobiography. And of course, now I'm in detox. I'm just going to write about nature now. But well, that's how it was. It was an accident, but in retrospect, it was inevitable. I think Juarez is one of the most important places in the world. I think more of the future is being written on the streets of Juarez than on the streets of Wall Street or Manhattan. I think they're in the fantasy land. They think they control the world. Well, the world's breaking down. And Juarez is one of the places the tectonic plates are grinding. And you can hear it if you got the guts to open your ears. Okay?
Sounds good. How much? That's it? Okay. Well, thank you.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure.
It was just half of it, Chuck.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.